recording, and likewise, if you don't want to be recorded, you can go ahead and click out now. Tonight's presentation will be by Dr. Gary Nackman. His sailing credentials. He sailed his entire life, as most of us who've sailed. He has had multiple boats. Gary's had he's prepped 2 boats for offshore sailing, and he's got over 15,000 nautical miles offshore. The number of races he's competed in, and we've competed with him: Newport to Bermuda, Marion to Bermuda, around Long Island. In 2021, he's going to be getting the boat in shape for doing Annapolis to Newport in 2021, and was that Newport to Bermuda in 2022? Gary, you can answer that. And Gary's also a member of both Raritan Yacht Club and Storm Trysail. So I'd like to turn it over to Gary to begin the presentation.
Okay, can everybody see my slides? Good.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Lou. So I grew up sailing, like a lot of us locals here, on the Long Island Sound, and I was very spoiled. Every summer, my dad would close his medical practice, and we would sail everywhere from the Chesapeake Bay to Maine and between Bermuda and Nova Scotia. He was the original owner of a 1972 Bristol 40 that I basically grew up on, and sailing has been a lifelong obsession. We did 2 longer offshore voyages. There was a trip to Nova Scotia and Bermuda, and a lot of trips up and down the coast. And when I started sailing, it was really very old school navigation. By the time my brother and I were about 11 years old, we could navigate, with a compass, a chart, a stopwatch, a lead line, and RDF was high tech, and we had a barometer. So this is actually, I like to joke, my first boat ride. My mother was pregnant with me as my dad was sailing in the Chesapeake Bay on this old wooden Chesapeake Bay skipjack. And as I said, this has been a lifelong obsession for me. Not so much my brother. We wonder if he was adopted sometimes, but he's putting a smile on as he was driving here, and that's a picture of my dad. And my first trip to Bermuda was in 1982, the summer after I graduated high school. And I put this up because it was really, we were lucky that we got there. I'm just going to put it that way and back, because we really didn't know much about weather and Gulf Stream and boat prep back then, but we had a really good crew. If you can see my cursor, this is Jimmy Mock. He had already been to Bermuda twice. This very intense looking gentleman he's passed since, but he was my dad's best friend, Colonel Lorraine Farquhar Armstrong, a descendant of Custer. And if you knew Army, you knew that what kind of stuff Custer was made of. He was a master navigator. He was the youngest wing commander in World War II flying bombers, and he was a master dinghy racer. Dick Cooper was a machinist, could fix everything. My dad, who was really known for his sartorial splendor, that's me standing at attention. And then we have Bob. He was to cover all the bases because he was a school teacher, but also a minister. So when things got bad, we looked to Bob to help us out. And this is a boat that my dad kept from 72 until 2014. We put a lot of miles on her, and finally at the age of 82, he thought he should donate her. Between 2000 and 2009, I was mostly dinghy sailing and coastal sailing, and I was really feeling lustful for blue water again. And so in 2009, my late wife and I purchased Blue Note, which is a Bristol 43.3, a Ted Hood design, a keel centerboard, a sloop with a detachable Solent stay, a very sea-kindly boat, great cruising boat, and we would just whisper around her, and we would tell her she was a race boat as well. And, we started kind of a gradual progression in what we were doing. We did a sail to nowhere in 2010 with what was to become the offshore racing crew, where we just sailed out for 3 days out of Raritan Bay into the ocean and back, practicing watch systems and seeing what worked, what didn't work. We did around Long Island in 2010, and then Marion, Bermuda in 11 and 13, a vineyard race in 13, and then 3 Newport Bermudas, 14, 16, and 18. And, right about the time where I had the boat exactly what I wanted her to be, I had an opportunity to rise to buy what I really was my dream boat, which was a Baltic 51. A pretty quick boat for her day. She was designed in 78 by Bob Ball. A thin keel, but a long fin with the centerboard, so good for the bay. A spade rudder. And what really attracted me to this boat was that her sister ship had did the Whitebread race in 81, and the boat actually did that stock. And my dream has always been to circumnavigate, so I thought this would be maybe a little bit better platform than Blue Note in terms of racing. And so why the Baltic 51? I'll show you this video that was put on YouTube, but someone who's become a friend of mine. This is a Frenchman who is sailing across the Atlantic in a little bit of a squall. The boat's just flying. He told me there's about 25 to 30 knots of wind here. And the boat was just doing very well and surfing pretty well. In the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to see how fast they were actually going. So almost 18 knots. So I saw this video and said, well, how could I not buy this boat? And so on high note, our first shakedown race was Annapolis, Newport in 2018, which we had to drop out of. It was the first distance race I ever had to drop out of. We were really boat for boat tied for first place, leaving the Chesapeake Bay in what had been 20 to 25 knots of wind. We flew down the bay with an A2 spinnaker up, or actually it was an A4, and wind went forward, and around midnight, we went to roll up the jib, and the electric furling motor failed. The chocks around the mast base at the deck level fell out, so the mast was pumping. The spinnaker went overboard and fouled my rudder and prop. So we had a little bit of a predicament, and then we fouled the staysail halyard, but I'm glad it happened there at the mouth of the Chesapeake rather than halfway to Newport. So we fixed everything, and we were able to do Marblehead, Halifax. It was so boring. We got to Halifax, there was nothing to fix. Newport, Bermuda in 20 was scrubbed. This year we're going to do Annapolis, Newport, Marion, Bermuda. And then next summer we're planning Newport, Bermuda. And the reason I bought the boat is to do the transatlantic race in the Fastnet in 2023, then bring the boat to the Caribbean. So how do you prepare a boat? It's very simple. It's this incredible balance of the captain, the boat, the crew, waging war against the environment, meaning the weather and the ocean. And they're really two simple things. I have this rule. Number 1, don't leave the boat. Number 2, don't leave the boat. Number 3, don't leave the boat. That's how you prepare the crew. And then in terms of preparing the boat, it's simple. You just have to keep the water out and everything will be fine. And so this is really where everybody wants to be. After your shower in Bermuda, having had maybe a cocktail, but to get here, you have to start here, and it really takes a tremendous preparation, and you have to start a lot sooner than you think you need to. And so I'm breaking this talk down into the different categories that I had mentioned, and we'll start with captain skill sets. And I think this is really critical. It's all about problem solving, and I think being a physician, particularly a surgeon, it shares a lot of similarities. I think problem solving requires a special ability to recognize and meet challenges despite a limited data set sometimes with probably less than perfect resources. You have to have tremendous organizational abilities, lots of moving parts to a voyage, and you have to have a lot of lists. And leadership, you have to bring out the best in those around you while maintaining a positive morale. So this is a common saying, but it really is just totally wrong because you can't be successful that way. And so it's simple. What is the captain's responsibility? Well, it's the health and safety of the crew and vessel, and that means being responsible for checking literally everything all the time. It requires experience, seamanship, navigational skills, the ability to read the weather, and a tremendous effort in boat preparation. So in terms of the crew, it helps to have people who have some miles under the keel, but that doesn't mean you can't bring newbies along. Has to be the right newbie though. Personality is incredibly important. No matter how big your boat, it's a small boat, and sleep deprivation and stress really bring out edges in people. People's health is very important. You need strong backs. You need people who are fairly resistant to seasick or have good strategies to deal with seasickness. In this day and age, I think you probably want to have somebody who's had the COVID vaccine. And then you need to be aware as captain of people's chronic medical conditions and actually get, a little index card of, people's chronic conditions, their medications, their allergies. So if something does happen, you know what's going on. You need a good mix of skills. You need drivers, you need muscle, you need mechanics, and you need, navigators and tacticians. And ultimately it comes down to training. And I have a very high opinion of the safety at sea seminars. And I really think it's a must for all the crew. So I was going to stop right here briefly if anybody needed to catch up or have any questions, and then we'll continue.
Adam, if there's anything, I see there's 4 questions in the chat window. If there's anything you want to bring up now, you can raise it to Gary.
I think there's been some chat back and forth, but I don't see any questions yet. So
okay, well, I'll continue then. So an important question is, what boat do you want to cross an ocean? And it's really a very simple question, isn't it? Well, having the right boat helps a lot, but the right boat is very subjective. But in my experience, I like a strong boat. Imagine a 30-foot wave breaking on a deck. Stability, the angle of vanishing stability. You don't want to have a boat that, you take a knockdown, they're going to turtle and not come back up. I think it's nice to have a sea-kindly boat that doesn't pound or broach because it makes it much more comfortable. And then condition, because with every boat, the state of repair, particularly with old boats, is everything. Every system must be checked before you set sail and periodically, during a voyage. The rigging, propulsion systems, electrical, electronics, freshwater, waste, hull, rudder, steering, sails, safety gear, communications, refrigeration, your stove, and your tanks. So which is better? Well, chocolate or vanilla. When you talk to people about boats, they have really very specific opinions. So which is better? This is Raritan. This is one of the Pardee boats that's gone around the world for many, many years, many circumnavigations. And can you contrast it with any boat that could be any more different than an Imoca 60, a foiling boat? There are advantages and disadvantages to everything. The Imoca 60s travel so fast, they can avoid weather systems. The Raritan, you have to batten down the hatches and deal with it. There are a lot of people who take issue with production boats like Catalinas and Beneteaus and Jeanneaus and Hunters for crossing oceans, but probably they're the most frequent boat that has crossed an ocean because it's what people own. And if you're doing a trip, that's on the trade winds, you're not crossing Cape Horn against the wind or doing, high altitude, sailing in the Arctic or the Antarctic. Those boats, have, tried and true experiences. So, lots of different design features to boats. 1 mast, 2 masts, 3 masts, a full keel with a cutaway forefoot. Do you want a attached keel? Do you want a rudder on a skeg, a rudder attached to the keel, or a spade rudder? Well, Bob Perry probably has designed more ocean-going vessels than any other designer, in the 20th and the 21st century. And he has a pretty specific opinion. I'm friends with him on Facebook. And this is a great quote. "I know you all have your stories, but I'm not interested in them. I have been around and designed enough boats to have confidence in spade rudders. We have some serious laggers. They're still arguing that keel-hung rudders are the best for cruising boats. Skegs are dangerous. If I design you a boat, I will do everything I can to give you the very best rudder. If you want a skeg, you can have a skeg, but it's not what I would suggest. It's 2020. I've learned a lot in 50 years. So the key really is to have a well-designed, well-built boat, and all of the above are probably appropriate. So how to make your boat safe? I absolutely think one of the best resources is World Sailing, the old ISAF category 0, 1, 2, 3 classifications. And the Bermuda race is a category 1 race. And there's a checklist of what's required for the race. And I don't care if you're racing or just cruising, I think everything in that really should be mandatory if you're going offshore. You want to make sure your boat is watertight. That includes your hatches, your companionway, ventilators. Everything needs to be able to be closed and repaired. What if you fall off a wave and break some portholes? You should have some plywood that's pre-cut, pre-shaped with a hole for a threaded rod and a 2x4 that you can pop through and quickly attach. You need clip-on points all over your boat. So if you have to go forward, you don't want to just rely on your jack lines. You want to be able to clip in hard. Your jack lines running up and down the boat need to be placed in such a way that when you fall, you don't fall off the boat, you still remain on the boat. If you have one pump, you have no pumps because pumps fail. You have to make sure your bilges are clean. You hear all kinds of stories of people's bilge pumps fouling because construction debris from 20 years ago will find your bilge pump. You want to have spares for all your essential systems and a list of them and know where they are. You need to have quality storm sails, life raft, EPIRB, ditch bag, communications, maybe a satellite phone, man overboard equipment, a drogue for emergency steering or for storm preparation. And then you need to practice by drilling. So this is what we have on High Note. It's a safety gear location graphic, and we put it on the door of the head so everybody has to look at it. And it has all the critical things that you might need to find in an emergency. Another thing that I love about High Note, if you look at my cursor, these crew cabins that are kind of parallel to the companionway here. So you have 4 people who can sleep in very comfortable berths where there isn't a lot of motion, and you need to have good lee cloths. That's very critical. And then you want to mark all your through-hole locations. We have a lot in this boat, 14. It's less than I had on Blue Note. I had 17, but everybody needs to be able to find these through holes with their eyes closed, because if you have a foot of water in your bilge, you're not going to be able to see it. And so you need to be able to know where they are and find them by feel. And each through hole should have a plug, a soft tapered plug attached to them. So you have to practice. We created laminated cards for the following emergency procedures: man overboard drills, abandoning ship, flooding, fire, and storm prep. And then you need to create teams and assign crew members to these teams to do these various things, and you must practice. So in terms of an emergency card for distress transmitting procedure, this is taped up on the bulkhead right near the VHF. Hold down the microphone and say, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is High Note, High Note, High Note. Whiskey Delta Kilo 753 run, Mayday, this is High Note. You give your position, North November, West Whiskey longitude, repeat our position is, we're in need of immediate assistance, we are sinking, on fire, man overboard, medical emergency, and you describe the boat and the number of souls aboard, and then you should operate your DSC, which is an automated system. If your VHF is tied to a GPS source, it'll give a location, and some DSCs you can actually program and select what your actual form of distress is, and everybody should become familiar because different VHF radios have different instructions for how to activate the DSC function. And so for flooding, Everybody puts on their PFD. You should heave to. Issue your distress call, either pan, possibly mayday, depending on how much water. And you man both manual bilge pumps, turn on your shower sumps, another good source. Make sure you have your automatic pumps on. Stand by with buckets. In the absence of a collision, inspect and close all seacocks. Inspect your knot meter and depth sounder through hulls. Inspect your stuffings box and rotor gland, and those are really the major sources of spontaneous flooding. Get your ditch bag team get it on deck and clip it to a member, and get your emergency water containers on standby. Attach them to the life raft painter if you launch the raft, and the life raft team will stand by to launch your raft. Abandon ship. Everybody puts on their PFD and polypro clothing and fallies and boots if there's time. Get your ditch bag team, get your emergency water, get your mayday. We have on our sat phone the U.S. Coast Guard direct emergency response number programmed in. If you have time, put your emergency strobe on, stand by to launch the raft. And then what if the captain is injured? You have to have somebody else designated to take charge. In my case, it's always Mitch Donahue. He'll assume command and make the call to launch the raft and abandon ship. Check that the painters are tied to the vessel and that you have that painter choked up. If you're in heavy wind, heavy seas, you'll never pull back your life raft if it's 20, 30 feet away from the boat. Sound off to make sure everybody's present. Launch the raft to leeward unless there's a fire. Clip on with your harness, with your tether, to the painter so that you don't drift away from the life raft. We think that we put the watch captains in the rafts. We have two. First, to help with the injured, move to the back of the raft, and basically be prepared to cut your raft free from the boat, turn on your EPIRB, call your sat phone again if you hadn't had time to do it, and fire flare. So this picture tells a lot of stories. This was in June, just before we did our first Marion Bermuda, and we're prepared to race or fire depth charges at any Nazi submarines we happen to find. This was a rental raft that was a little bit bigger than what was promised to us. And we through bolted this bracket to the stern deck, and the arrow shows a hydrostatic release so that if we don't even have time to release the life raft, as the boat sinks, it'll release and the raft will float to the surface. We have emergency water lashed to a lashing board, a clip-on point you can see here for crew when they're working on the aft deck, horseshoes with strobes, our life sling to help retrieve a man overboard, a MOMI module, which is an inflatable man overboard system with a pylon, a horseshoe, and a light. We have multiple GPS antennas. We have a Navtex weather antenna, a Sirius weather radio antenna, our sat phone antenna. And so we're really prepared to go anywhere with that kind of a setup. This is what a better raft looks like. This is one that I own. This is an 8-man Viking offshore raft. Practice with your storm sails. This is our storm trysail. This is vintage. This was from my dad's boat. It was never flown in anger. It attaches to a separate track that goes from the base of the mast. And you don't want to be figuring it out the first time in 50 knots worth of wind. Some of the first races we did, we kept it in a bag at the mast, basically ready to go. We don't do that anymore. This is our storm jib. One of the requirements for the race is a ability to set it independent of your luff, the foil luff, because it can pull out. And so Blue Note has a Solent stay, which is a removable inner forestay that sets just aft of the main furler. The beauty of this is that you don't need running backstays because it goes all the way up to the top of the mast, very close to where the forestay attaches. And you want to practice setting this and find out where your jib leads are. An emergency tiller. Most wheel steered boats come with an emergency tiller, and they're notoriously difficult to use. Look how short this is. Could you imagine the leverage required on this? So what we do is we put a line, we lash a line to it going port and starboard to secondary winches so that you could control it that way. This is a hole in the aft deck. There's a berth underneath there, and you lift up the mattress and the boards, and that's right over the rudder head. But you could see if you really need to use it, this would be moving all around. If I was going to cross the Atlantic, my plan was to take a piece of Delrin, thread it to fit in that access port and use it basically as a bearing. A gale rider drogue is very useful for storms and for emergency steering. This is what it looks like. It's got a stainless, heavy, thick wire around it, and then a series of straps, some lines with a swivel. And the idea for drogue steering is that you have it behind you with a bridle, and you bring it to your midship cleats or chocks if you have them, so it's kind of where the keel is. And then you bring it back to a winch. You try to balance your sails for the direction you want to go. And then to turn, you basically, if you want to go to starboard, you pull in on the starboard winch, it changes the force. And if you wanted to port, you go in the other direction. There's a good video online of somebody actually doing this. And it works. We tried it under power and under sail, and it does work. This is us towing it. You don't need a very long bridle to do this. This is not a storm condition. And you can see by my cursor where it is in the water. Questions?
So Gary, there's a couple of questions. One is, what does Whiskey Delta Kilo 7531 stand for?
Oh, we have basically a ship station radio license to have a VHF radio, and we also have a single sideband. Those are my call numbers. So if the Coast Guard heard that, they would be able to look in a database and find out who we are.
Yeah, there were also several questions on where to get more information about safety at sea. I think I've addressed most of those, and other people also contributed. So I think we're good on that unless someone wants to know more. A third question was, will this slideshow be made available to us?
You're recording this, but I can also give the club copies of the slides.
Okay, so, okay, thank you. So yes, we are recording it, and that will be available to everyone. If you want to see the presentation, we'd ask that you reach out to Lou and do that via the club email. So thank you.
Gary, this is Val. I have a question. Hopefully, you know, something that might be on the minds of other people, not just myself. In an emergency, who would be defining the level of this emergency and the actions that would be needed? Obviously, you know, there are some clear-cut emergencies, like the boat is rapidly sinking, abandoned ship. But things like, you know, seasickness and other things where other people don't care really about, may not care about what's at stake, and they just want to be off the boat, and they want, you know, Coast Guard to be called to help. So what I'm driving at is when things are in a bad situation, but not, you know, life or death situation, how do you handle, you know, different opinions from crews of what should be done?
That's a good question. I think that's why you don't sail necessarily with strangers. You really need to know people, and they need to have trust in you. You have to have a discussion. You can't just call the Coast Guard because you're seasick. I mean, ultimately, the captain is responsible. I mean, there's some difficult cases in that have hit, you know, the courts of somebody who basically was either, was a friend of a friend, came along, was on drugs, got seasick, maybe was dehydrated, maybe had a psychiatric history, and jumped off the boat. And the person had become combative before this. And
Yeah, I read that one.
yeah, and there was a question whether or not the captain did an adequate job managing it, and there were no criminal findings against him. But I think I'll take this offline. I can talk more about this as a physician, and as a captain about health issues. But ultimately, the captain is responsible for making and being responsible for the outcome of all the decisions.
All right, thank you.
So navigation. I still believe in paper charts. I always have them on board. I also like to have several other forms of electronic navigation, multiple GPSs, chart plotters are nice. Got to have 2 useful compasses. You're required to have a main compass for these races and also a secondary compass, which could be a hand-bearing compass. I have no idea how you would steer with a hand-bearing compass, but I like to have a spare one along. You need a log and a knot meter. That's very helpful. I carry a sextant. I do not claim to be an expert at celestial. I learned how to do it in the 80s when my dad was taking JNNN with the Power Squadron, and every race I try to take at least 1 or 2 sites just for grins and giggles. We won an award the very first year we did Marion, Bermuda. It was the Cook's Award for, I think, finishing last boat for boat. And when I got the award was given to me by the governor of Bermuda, I had to let him know that my final site confirmed that the GPS had the island in the wrong position by 10 miles. But it is still important to be able to use a sextant. A friend of my dad's went transatlantic with the ability of only to do a noon sight. That can even be helpful. And a barometer is extremely important because, all weather is local. All the weather that matters is local. So in terms of weather, there's a difference between forecast and model data, and this is extremely important. A forecast is a product of a meteorologist. Model data is a product of a computer program. Regardless, the weather forecast or model data is almost always wrong the further in time you try to predict it. And how wrong can have serious consequences. It is helpful to have multiple methods of getting the forecast and weather data aboard. So you can think of getting weather data as being initially expensive or cheap, or have a low or high continuing cost to use it. A satellite broadband, having a dish on board is very expensive initially and a high continuing cost. A satellite phone where you can download compressed files costs about $1,000. It's about a medium price and high continuing cost per minute. An Iridium Go is a little cheaper to buy, and it also gives you the ability to text but no real good voice communication. And it has a medium continuing cost, free data on a lot of plans. Single sideband radio is still useful. High price initially, cheap continuing cost. If you have like a Pactor modem, it's pretty cheap to be able to get emails and even weather facts. A Sirius weather module, I think, is great. At some points on every race, we've had trouble getting weather with every other system except my Sirius weather module on my chart plotter. That has always worked. Navtex has also always worked. It's an automated system that downloads your high seas forecast and alerts. People even take a little battery operated shortwave receiver, have a microphone on their laptop or iPad, and you can actually download a weather fax that way. It takes a long time and you have to be very patient. So you're planning to go offshore. What time of year should you do it? Well, fortunately, a lot of people have figured this out for us. Jimmy Cornell has great books on basically how to go around the world. If you look at the world arc, he goes around the world basically in about 1.5 years. And you figure this out basically, what month do I not want to be in a place because there's too much of a risk of a cyclone or a hurricane? Where is the ice? Where do you want to be south of? And basically you have all these little figures in the middle that shows the likelihood of the Beaufort wind scale And the longer the arrow, the higher the likelihood of the wind from that direction. And it's very useful, and these are basically downloadable for free from the government. Current also matters for not just the Gulf Stream, but anywhere in the world. And these currents are really determined these days by sea surface temperature taken by satellites or radar altimetry of sea surface height. Sea surface temperature is limited by cloud cover. Radar altimetry works regardless of cloud cover. Both of these methods basically require the satellite to pass over in an area, so you're getting a little slice of data, and they put together these pictures that the satellites take to make kind of a composite image. And there are multiple models for estimated current vectors based on either data source or blended sources. And then you have expert oceanographers who can take a look at all these things and draw you a map. So this is something I'm going to talk about, the conditions before the 2016, which was kind of an infamous Newport Bermuda race. This is the sea surface temperature. The red is warm water, the green is cooler water, and this is a single slice that was taken that was used to help make that picture. And you can see the blank spots that are white are where the cloud cover wasn't conducive to getting a good picture. This is May, just before the race. I start looking at the Gulf Stream basically a year in advance. I look at it every week. And this is altimetry data to determine the currents. And it gives you kind of a very different picture. This is another picture of altimetry on the left. And this is available. This other HOPS model is available from a website called maracus.org, and it uses sea surface temperature. This is the Harvard Oceanographic Prediction Model. It's also a good model. But then you have the real expert in the world, Jennifer Clark, who used to be with NOAA. She's in her 70s and she still works independently, and you can purchase for a very reasonable price, basically charts that show what her interpretation is of all the data. And she's not always right either, and she'll admit it. You know, you have very limited data sources sometimes, and things change over time. And this is our run line course to Bermuda. So how do you know where to go for Bermuda? I'm not as good as Kelly. Kelly doesn't use any routing software. He's just the world expert at figuring out how to get to computer fast, Kelly Robinson. I use a program called Expedition. I don't have his level of experience. I put in my boat pullers, the wind grid, the current grid, and it gives me an output for what's supposed to be theoretically the fastest route. But it also could be the safest route. You can put in variables that you want to avoid certain sea states of waves greater than, you know, whatever, put it in. So it's also a really good safety factor. And basically this line here tells you what the recommended course is, but it really depends on the accuracy of all these variables. It's garbage in, garbage out computing unless you have things fine-tuned. So this is a weather model a week before the 2016 Newport race. And basically, this was looking at the second day of the race. And this weather barb shows 45 knots of wind right near the rum line. And the direction of this is directly against the current, which is a very dangerous thing, wind against current. This is 2 days before the race, and there was a concern of this low here off in the Carolinas. And what you see here is known as a trough of low pressure that was building. And professional weather forecast companies, there were 3 of them that were involved with the race, basically said in the Gulf Stream there could easily be winds going up to 40 knots with higher gusts and scattered squalls. Near the stream, seas will be building. They could run 10 to 15 feet, and they could be steeply pitched square waves, and some could be breaking, especially in the scattered squalls. And that's very concerning, having a 15-foot square wave. And again, the estimates are the mean for the highest third of the waves. So you could have 30-foot waves here breaking that would be right on your beam. So it was very concerning, and they didn't really know what to do. This is the day before the race. The low was moving here, and the day of the race, it was kind of sitting here. And this is what the satellite looked. There was a big low system here and this other system moving over here, and it was very concerning. So it was a decision point, go or no go. I'll tell you that something like 25% of the boats decided not even to start the race. And they were really the high-tech race boats. For them, it's just another race. They don't want to break boats. There's a lot of money involved. They've probably done 20 races. And so it wasn't a big deal. And then you have other people who maybe it was their first race and they weren't feeling, all that confident. And you really can't judge somebody on that decision. To quote Clint Eastwood, a man's got to know his limitations. That goes for anybody. So we had a team discussion and we had all viewpoints discussed, and really people felt pretty confident in what we could handle. And we decided to start, and if conditions got really severe in the Gulf Stream, we could always turn around and run back. And this confidence was based on my heavy weather experience. And as an 11-year-old, with my dad, we sailed through a tropical storm offshore, Tropical Storm Amy. In '82, on the way to Bermuda, we were in a full gale with 20-foot waves. Coming back from Marion, Bermuda in 2013, we had a 3-day gale. And then I've been in numerous squalls. And so heavy weather preparation, what do? You make sure everything is secure. Imagine your boat's upside down and you're shaking it violently. Nothing can be out. You want to have it like a staging picture for your selling it, without tchotchkes out on the shelves though. You want to make sure you have food, finger food preparation, sandwiches, because you're not cooking in this kind of weather. Remove everything that's not necessary from the deck. Check all your safety gear. Check your pumps, check your bilges, close vents that can leak, damage control gear, make sure you could repair your hatch or a port that stoves in. Make sure your storm sails are ready to go, review your emergency procedures, and have a shoreside monitor. Know you're out there and have a set schedule for checking in, and they need to know what to do if you don't respond. So it turned out a big nothing. We never saw winds really much more than 20 knots. So heavy weather sailing, there are a lot of books written about it. If you talk to people who've circumnavigated, they tell you they spend less than 5% of their time in heavy weather, because most people cruise around the world following trade winds, and they're running before it, and they're trying to be in the right place at the right time and avoid being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think you can learn a lot from reading John Rusmaneri's book about the Fastnet disaster '79. Great books about the Queen's birthday storm in '94, Sydney Hobart in '98. I asked John Rusmaneri at a lecture, well, what would you do if you were in one of these storms? And he shrugged his shoulders. And he was in the Fastnet storm. He was on a Swan 47. Every storm is different. Every boat is going to be different. It really matters what the period of the wave is, how steep they are. And you have to basically be prepared to shift tactics, be familiar with everything, know what your boat can do, and assess when things aren't working. So storm tactics really comes down to alignment versus motion. There are active methods and passive methods. And a lot of it is going to have to do with what your boat likes to do. Forereaching is something that John Kretschmer talks about a lot. And that's what we did in 2013. You're basically sailing at about 60 degrees to the wind in a very underpowered method. You're under control. You still need good steerage. Things get worse. You can run with storm sails or under bare poles. You can either motor sail or sail into the waves, picking spots to crest over. That was a technique that was done in Sydney Hobart by some very light displacement racing boats that survived pretty well with this methodology. They had very good drivers, and they basically would pick the spot where they wanted to crest over the wave. Difficult at night. Passive methods would be heaving to. using a parachute sea anchor off the bow, using the Lynn and Larry Pardee heave-to method with a sea anchor combination. Laying a hull is probably never a good idea, and running with a drag device. So heaving to, basically, you backwind your jib, and you put your helm, your tiller to leeward. You're basically trying to steer the boat into the wind. You have a soft reefed main or storm trysail, and the boat's trying to steer into the wind, but the backed jib prevents that from happening. And you don't really want to have much forward motion. You just basically want to slip slide downwind. To do this, you need sea room. Typically, people drift, at 1 to 2 knots to leeward this way. A sea anchor, another method that's described. It's really designed to go on the bow only. There's tremendous loading because it really stops your boat as a wave hits you. Chafe, chafe, chafe is a problem. A lot of people lose their sea anchors. The rudder can be vulnerable as you get hit by a wave and you back down. You want to make sure that your rudder's locked. This is a drag-assisted heaving to method that the Pardees described. They have a bridle that they create with a snatch block on the main line, and they bring that line to a winch. You drift slowly, and you create a slick to windward that's supposed to calm seas so that you don't get a breaking sea. Morgan's Cloud, it's another popular website. They use a gale rider. They're the only people who advocate this off the bow while they're heaving to kind of control their motion. Drag devices are kind of divided up into low drag and high drag devices. This is the gale rider. I also have a delta drogue and a sea brake. These are 3 well-described devices that are used. A high drag device basically stops you. It puts the brakes on. The low drag devices, you kind of go at about 3 knots. These high drag devices, it's a series of cones on a tow line that's weighted. The length of it and the size of the cones are really designed based on how big your boat is. The purpose of this is to prevent your boat from tripping. What really kills people in boats is when your boat trips, you pitch pole. The manufacturer of this device claims that nobody has pitch poled who's used one of these devices. It's not really true these days. There are boats that have had these out where they've chafed through and they then pitch pole. The device worked, but it's very difficult. How are you going to attach this on your boat in a way that you're not getting horrible chafe? So in 2013, this was pilot error on my part. We were having really a lot of fun in Bermuda, and normally people leave kind of Saturday or Sunday after the race, and it was Tuesday where we decided we wanted to stay. What was forecast, and I was talking with a private meteorologist who I hired for the race and for the return. He was describing winds starting west-southwest, southwest, and then going to the south, starting kind of at 10 to 15 and then going to 20 to 25. Seas maybe 2 to 10 feet, nothing really more than 15 feet. Given the boat, we really didn't think this was going to be a big deal. What we had was gale force winds, force 8 to 9 for 3 days, about 2 days after we left Bermuda. Wind was from the west-southwest and the west. Wind started out 10 to 15 as predicted, but then went to 30 to over 45 sustained. Seas started out at 5 to 10, and then they were 20 to 30 feet, and some of them breaking. It was very interesting to see a wave break away from you, and you see something, an area the size of a football field, just become white. The tactics that we employed, we knew we were going to have higher weather. We had heavy weather jib on the furler early on, 2 reefs in the main. We then dropped the main, rolled up the heavy weather jib, which is the same fabric weight to a storm jib. And we decided not to put up the storm trysail. I wanted to. Mitch didn't want to. He raised a very good point. We were doing fine just under the reefed, the rolled up jib, and it risked somebody to go forward to put up the storm trysail. We were doing fine, so we just kept on with the rolled up. a heavy weather jib. One danger would be if the pennant, the furling line broke, then that would open up, but we were really underpowered. I think we would have been okay with this jib. It's probably only like a 60–70% sail. We had some lee helm, but excellent steerage. We floated and slipped the waves like a duck. We had the centerboard up, but it kind of sounded like an 800-pound sledgehammer with the centerboard kind of moving inside its case. We actively steered the boat in relation to the waves. We tried to keep experienced people at the wheel. We had two sets of waves. One was aligned with the wind, another was off the port quarter. When the waves met, they broke, but we were basically able to travel at 3 knots in the direction we wanted to go. So I didn't really want to run with it because that means you're in the storm longer. You could hear the waves at night, but you couldn't see them. At one point, we did think the boat was hit by a freight train. I was at the wheel when a wave broke over the boat. The boat looked like she was underwater. I got knocked from one side of the center cockpit to the other. I was saved by my tether. I absolutely would have been washed overboard if I didn't have my tether on. And we heeled over probably 60 degrees when we got hit, but there was no damage. So these are some great resources. Coles, heavy weather sailing, started, I think, to be written in the 40s or the 50s. They're current editions. The best online database for drag devices is this Victor Shane's device. Here's the link. He actively asked people to send information on the use of these drag devices. John Kretschmer, he believes in forereaching. He's written a lot of great books. Lynn and Larry Pardee. Larry passed away this past year. But lots of books, lots of great videos. Webb Childs has written numerous stories. Steve and Linda Dashew have a great book called Surviving the Storm, and also a book on weather. They're really invaluable resources. Skip Novak, one of the original Whitbread sailors, he has a lot of writings. It's interesting. He doesn't believe in drag devices. He doesn't believe in parachute sea anchors. He thinks they're very dangerous to set. He believes in forereaching or running. Nigel Calder is probably the world's greatest resource for sailboat repair, and everybody should have a copy on board. And I have to thank a lot of people because, I've been blessed to have, 20, 30 people, family, friends, members of the club, members of other clubs really helped me prepare the boat. And it literally, I've been able to literally do so much in the last 12 years because of these people and the names here. And excuse me if I left anybody out, but it's just amazing. I'm truly blessed. And special thanks to my wife, Jessica. I may be the captain, but she's the admiral. And thank you.
So Gary, there were several questions that we answered via the chat, but one specific question, I know you mentioned it early on, but who is the designer of the Baltic?
Bob Ball from the CNC Design Group designed her. So Baltic Yachts has a very interesting history. There were 5 people who were working with Swan, Norder Swan in Finland, and they wanted to build a more aggressive race boat than Swan was willing to at the time. At the time, Swan was building solid fiberglass hulls. Sparkman's and Stephen designed boats in the 70s. So 5 guys left, formed Swan, and they said, well, who's designing the hot race boats of the day? CNC in the 70s, they were the hot boats. They were winning the SORC. They had balsa cord hulls that were known to be very strong and very solid. And so the hull was designed by Bob Ball, and the interior was designed by Baltic. If you look at my boat from the outside or the inside, you think you're on a Swan. I mean, they stole, the design methods. You look at the joinery down below, the way the stanchions are put on. I mean, really, they're indistinguishable. Lighter, stronger, faster. was the motto of Baltic. You know, it still is. Now, lighter is a relative term. My boat displaces 39,000 pounds. I thought my Bristol was a heavy boat, but the Baltic really just massive the way things are built.
So there's another question here on suggestions to start crewing offshore. They have their own boat, but would love to learn from others. I'm going to let you answer that in a second. But Todd, we are going to have a seminar in late May. It may slide into June, where we talk about opportunities and how to get on boats to crew offshore. So we will have another seminar. But Gary, I'd like to hear from you and just hear your suggestions.
Yeah, I've taken, you know, relatively new sailors on deliveries, on returns, usually not on a race. You need a good mix. I think it's difficult to put somebody who's not all that experienced on a race because of expectations. And I think you have more time on a return delivery to explain things. And you start small, you know, if you own a boat, you start small, do some overnights in controlled situations. You know, it's an apprenticeship. You learn by doing, and it's very helpful to learn with more experienced people. I mean, there are paid apprenticeships where you can basically rent a berth on John Kretzmer's boat and lots of other people's. There's a guy out in British Columbia who's got a Baltic 51. I think it's Bulldog Sailing, who does sail training for people. He does the the Vic race from Victoria to Hawaii or something. He does that as well. I mean, so there are a lot of opportunities out there that you can pay for, and there's a lot of opportunities because people are usually looking for return crew, and I'm always looking for return crew. I'm always looking for new race crew. I like to race my boat with 12 people, so you need a lot of people.
Hey, Gary, if you could unshare your screen for a second, or
Yeah, while he's doing that, there's one other question, and that is, where does sea anchor chafe occur? And he asked at the boat attachment or on the sea anchor line. And so, Gary, I'll let you answer that question, please.
Yeah, there are two issues. One, if you don't have a good swivel, the line twists, and you can have a problem with that. That's been described with the parachute anchors, also with the gale rider. Most people don't have a problem with twist if you have a good swivel. The chafe point is wherever it attaches to the boat, going through a chock, going through a block. You have to readjust it. But again, it's very difficult to readjust these things. They're under massive load. Most people install chain plates on their stern. If they really want to use one of these Jordan series strokes, they go to the side of the hull near the stern and install a chain plate so that they have a place where they can attach the bridle where it's not going to chafe on the boat.
Okay, so we are gonna, Gary, thank you for his presentation. I've been sailing for offshore for 3 years, and I've learned a ton from this, so thank you. So what we're gonna do is have, before a longer Q&A session, and I know we're running long, but I just wanted to share a little bit of, just to give Paul an opportunity to talk about the club, because in addition to members of our club, we have others. So Paul, if you wanted to just go through some things, and then we can, and after Paul, we'll go over some of our upcoming presentations. So go ahead, Paul, if you wanted to just go through some stuff real quick.
So Gary, thank you very much. I think, you know, especially from seeing here in the chat, everybody really appreciate all the information you shared. A lot of really good info for folks that have been sailing on blue water before, and also for folks that are looking to get involved in it. For the folks that are on the Zoom meeting, I know some are club members, some are not. So we wanted just to talk a little bit about RYC, give you a little bit of background about the group that's organizing this event. Our RYC is based out of Perth Amboy, New Jersey. You know, we offer sailing programs throughout the entire year. Right now, we're getting ready for our summer, spring series. You know, there's a lot of different type of boats that are involved. Primarily, our racing is Wednesday nights, but We also have distance racing. We also participate with other boats that are, other clubs that are out on the bay. You know, if you haven't been sailing before, you know, I would suggest you look us up. There's a lot of things that you can learn. We have members that have been, you know, sailing for a couple of years, and you have folks like Gary that have been, you know, sailing almost around the world with how many nautical miles he's got under his belt. We have racing Wednesday nights, weekends, cruising events. If you're looking to get involved in sailing, but don't want sort of the responsibility of having a sailboat, right? We have shared boat programs, which are, you know, great ways just to get involved in sailing, and then figure out, you know, maybe that next boat's a 30-foot boat or 35-foot boat. A lot of folks that get involved in sailing will wind up having multiple different boats, and having a shared boat's a great way just to get that underlying experience, get familiar with the bay. We offer various different women's sailing, summer sailing classes, ASA certification. We sail all year long. You know, so we're sailing. We just finished up our remote control lasers. If you look out on Facebook, we have plenty of videos of that. Frostbiting Wednesday night throughout the summer. So, you know, we wanted just to share a little bit about RYC. We do hold these types of education events throughout the year. Yep, thank you. Our next one is next Wednesday, and it's part of our Blue Water series. John had mentioned it, Lou had mentioned it, but the next few education events are going to be about blue water sailing. So next week's going to be about marine weather, current data. Gary had mentioned it earlier, and we're going to be going ahead and having one that really jumps in deep about weather models, current models. It's going to be from folks at Rutgers who are sort of on the leading edge of the science. There's going to be 2 presenters there, and it's going to be a very interesting event. Also in mid-May, we're going to be having one about medicine, first aid offshore sailors. You know, once you turn away and you head out into the ocean, you got to know your own first aid. As Gary mentioned, you can't call Coast Guard for everything, and there's no 911. So you really have to be prepared, and that's really what these series are all about. There will also be other events. I suggest that you keep an eye on the RYC Facebook site. However you found us tonight, there was multiple different posts in many different areas. We'll be reposting to that, but the easiest thing to do is to follow us on Facebook. You'll be able to, you know, get an eye into all the content that we have out there and all the events, exciting events we have coming up. We also, Lou, we want to just kick off the poll real quick regarding the timing.
So before we do that, yes, and I guess that would be Adam that would do that. But I want to mention the weather seminar. These are the professors and the people that are running the Are You Cool website and the Maracus website that Gary mentioned. It's going to be a deep dive through the currents and the winds and stuff like that. There'll be a tutorial on that.
So while we're doing that, there were some other questions. Plus, we're willing to open up the questions as well to over the mic. One of the questions, Gary, was on heaving to or hove to. Have you ever done that offshore?
I have, just to practice. I did it on my dad's boat, the Bristol 40, with, you know, had a kind of a full keel with a cutaway 4-foot with an attached rudder. Worked very well. I used to do it on my Flying Scot to eat lunch.
Yeah.
You know, it was, it's most boats, other than super high tech, you know, very narrow root, fin keel, torpedo kind of keel boats will heave to pretty well.
And I also have used the technique mostly inshore, like Vineyard Sound, Long Island Sound, for the exact same reason. There's actually 2 reasons. One, to grab lunch. The other is another bio basically a bio break. So Adam, I'm not sure if I missed any of the questions. If I did not, and anyone wants to ask a direct question, it's actually a great question here. Have you ever been surprised by bad weather? Could you have avoided it?
I'm reminded of a line from a movie, No One Expects the Spanish Inquisition. You know, in the Gulf Stream, you have these micro weather systems. It doesn't matter what the forecast is. You have this, you know, mass of hot water with hot air, and you are just always getting squalls. So you kind of expect the unexpected. The trip back in 2013 from Bermuda, it was much worse than I expected. It was much worse than Noah expected. It was much worse than Locust Weather expected. The people who I hired, it happens. But, you know, I've been surprised by the absence of weather, of wind, you know, where you just inexplicably sail into a hole and you're looking at your AIS and you see other boats moving, you know, just little micro weather systems. But, you know, with modern weather, you know, you generally have a pretty good feeling, you know, of how the systems are moving. And lots of ways of getting it. On YouTube, there's a couple. Their name of the YouTube channel is the Rigging Doctor. I've spoken to them actually, and they he's a dentist who took time out from his practice on an old Morgan 45 to cross the Atlantic from west to east. And basically to get weather, he was using his barometer. He was having trouble using an iPad and an inexpensive single sideband radio to download a grid. He found it very difficult to do. And basically, you know, he would sail, if he had too much wind, he would sail towards lower pressure. And if he had not enough wind, he would sail to lower pressure. You know, very simple stuff. And, you know, that works too. But it's awfully nice to know that there's a low forming someplace and, you know, which way are you going to go, you know, to avoid the path and get in the better quadrant.
So I think all of us who've sailed have experienced unexpected weather. It might be a short-term event, might be a microblast, but during the day, one of the things I like to look at is the clouds as they are approaching, and really look at the line as you start to get underneath the cloud. Typically, you'll see a microblast underneath the cloud, and it can be significantly higher wind force as you go through those. Gary, you mentioned one of the items which is more difficult, and that's sailing at night, because your visual senses aren't able to pick those up. Any suggestions for as you segue from day to night regarding sailing offshore?
It can be a real challenge, particularly when you're tired. I mean, I've literally been sailing, you know, my entire life, and sometimes in very unstable conditions, I actually would put my autopilot on, not during a race, but during a delivery. You know, it's 2 a.m. You take your attention, you know, from the compass, and you find you're 20 degrees off course. It's very important to, I didn't mention it, but an anti-jibe device. The only close call that we've had with, I think, damage to the boat or an injury was during the 13 race, where we had 2 accidental jibes at night, where the person at the helm got a little disoriented, and we jibe one way and jibe back, and the jibe device wasn't set tight enough to prevent the jibe, and somebody was standing up and they almost got hit by the boom, and that would have been an absolute disaster. Situational awareness is really tough. So actually, while I'm sailing, you know, would put the autopilot on, and sometimes it can actually drive better than you.
Almost always it can drive better than we do. Brian, you had requested Gary's email. I would ask that if you are a club member, you can find his email on the roster. if you are not an RYC club member, I would ask that you reach out to one of the RYC emails that are published on our site, and if you give us your email that way, we can have Gary reach out to you. But I prefer not to give emails out on a public domain.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, so Brian, just look on our site, and there are a couple of generic emails that you can send to, and we'll make sure that we get it to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Assuming Gary wants to be wants to do so. So, but thank you.
That to him.
So Sumner asks, and I also had a similar question around life jackets and tethers. What are your rules on life jackets and tethers? When do people wear them? When do you ask that everybody's tethered in?
If you're on deck, you have your life jacket on. Unless we're absolutely becalmed and the sails aren't moving and we're taking a bucket bath. And then in terms of the tether, certainly at night, all the time, you clip on before you leave the cabin. You have there's a place to clip on, before you come up the stairs. And anytime there's any kind of serious, wind greater than, if you have white caps, you probably should be tethered. So we're really strict with it.
Yeah, I will just add to that, the tether has kept, tether is the reason why I'm here today. Without a tether, I'd be off. I would be fish feed at this point, long gone. So we broached that night, and we were still going about 3 knots even while we were knocked down. So had it not been for that tether, I would have been off the boat. So anytime at night, anytime that the conditions are high, when the wind conditions and wave actions are high, and if people are going forward to make sail changes in anything other than very, very light winds, we make sure that everybody's tethered in. The PFD, I always wear it at night, and when conditions start to get up, once you start getting up in the mid-teens. Actually, Gary's rule is far better, because this time of year, if you're sailing offshore, the going off the boat isn't going to kill you. Hypothermia will kill you very quickly. And it's not the temperature, you actually drown because you can no longer function. There are some great videos on macho guys, Coast Guard, police, auxiliary police, military personnel who've gone in the water in cold temperatures, and they just can't make it. They can't swim more than about 20 feet. And it's quite eye-opening. So we are clubless. Okay. So interesting. Todd, I would ask that you reach out to me via the same way that we talked about with Gary to get my email, that you reach out to the club. I'm very familiar with Marion, and we can talk some more about how to potentially get you on a boat. So does anyone want to ask any questions? And Adam, have I missed anything?
Sumner has a question. I could see on the chat.
You're going to like that question. So go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, so, ask anyone, including my wife, that I am totally obsessed with sailboats. I probably look at Yacht World 3 times a week for the last, as long as there's been an internet in the Yacht World, I look at it. I still do, even though I have my dream boat. There was a narrow range of boats that I was interested in. If I was going to replace Blue Note, it was a pretty narrow range. I was looking at Swans, Baltics, a couple one-off racing boats that had been converted. But I really wanted to have a boat that had less than 6-foot draft. And so then, because the regatta version of my boat with a thin keel has 9-foot draft. Most of the Swans that aren't centerboards have 7 or 8 foot draft, and for Raritan Bay and cruising in the Northeast, it's horrible. So I really wanted a dual use boat. So I had a very narrow range of boats that I was looking at, and I looked at a Swan 47 right at the time. I was looking at Blue Note that was a High Note that was a centerboarder, and there were some things I liked a lot more about the Baltic than the Swan. But yeah, it wasn't a random, certainly wasn't a random thing.
Any other questions?
I think that's all the questions I see coming in.
Excellent. Well, we ran long, but it was actually an excellent session. Gary, thank you for taking the time and putting that presentation together. It was excellent. Oh, absolutely. And to mirror what Paul has said, anybody wants to get more information, just reach out to the club at through our club site, ryc.org. And if you contact anybody at the club with any questions on the presentation, it'll filter back to us. Keep an eye out on the club page or on our Facebook page, or just a YouTube search for Raritan Yacht Club, and you get information on our upcoming presentations and goings on at the club. And if anybody, Paul, Adam, John, if anybody else has anything else, speak now. Otherwise, we can adjourn for the evening. Anybody, Paul?
Thanks again to everybody, and especially appreciate everyone coming out for our presentation and participating. It wouldn't be very interesting if we were presenting to ourselves, so really appreciate everyone coming out.
Absolutely. Paul, anything?
No, I think I just second what Adam had to say, and I look forward to seeing everybody at our seminar next week. Feel free, if you haven't already, to sign up for them, and have a good night.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you again, everyone. Good night.
Yep, thank you.